I would say that if you are debating if you have enough knowledge, that is already a good sign that you are being mindful about wanting to deliver a great experience for your students, about not wanting to, overpromise, right? So, so that's step one. I think the second thing after that is to realize that your level of expertise, it's not an absolute line in the sand where it's like, oh, if you have X number of years you can teach, if you have less than this number of years of experience, you can't teach, right? It's not that at all. It really is relative to your student's experience. So if you are a couple steps ahead of your student, you have something to teach them, right? If are, somewhere here and claiming to teach something that you aren't great at, or to teach a student, to target student that actually knows more than you, then don't do that, right? But most people can think of themselves a couple years ago and the challenges that you were facing a couple years ago that you have since figured out, right? So wherever you are, there are people who are a couple steps behind you who could benefit from your learning.
Hi, friends and family. This is JJ Rescas, and this is another episode of Optimizing Me, or Optimizándome in Spanish, the space where we invite top performers from different industries to learn from their stories, their ups and downs, their lessons, and mostly their mindset. Our guest today is a polymath. Over the years, she mastered and intersected multiple areas like marketing, leadership, brand identity, culture, storytelling, and more. She worked with brands like Gap, Old Navy, Banana Republic, and Loreal before becoming the co-founder of the altMBA with Seth Godin in 2014. Nowadays, she is the co-founder of Maven, a platform that supports content creators in disrupting the way that traditional education works. And we're going to talk about in depth about this topic today. She is the undisputed godmother of Cohort Based Courses and helped people like Nir Eyal, Sahil Bloom, and Pat Flynn create innovative and transformational experiences for their audiences. I'm personally super excited for this conversation because much of the work here at Optimizing Me is influenced by our guests' work. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Wes Kao. Hi, Wes. How are you doing?
Really excited to be here today, JJ.
Great. So let's start with three questions that are going to get us all into context. Who is Wes Kao? What is a cohort-based course? And how these two things relate?
So I am co-founder of Maven. We're a platform that makes it really easy for experts to teach their expertise and their knowledge online and reach a global audience. Um, and this relates to what courses are and what Maven is, because when I look back at my experience in school, I was not a great student. I found it hard to stay focused, to grasp certain topics and concepts that I felt like other students just got faster. And I have a story from when I was in college, freshman year of college at UC Berkeley. I took Calculus 1, and I had high ambitions for my college career, that I was going to get A's, I was going to do so well. First semester calculus, I get a C. It was an 800-person lecture. I sat in the back of the room the entire time. The professor never turned around to face the class, just, always talked to the chalkboard. I pretty much slept at the back of the class the entire time. So the C was actually not surprising, given that I literally didn't learn anything. It might have been actually a good grade given how little I learned. So I feel like this is a little bit of a redemption story, because years later, I was living and working in San Francisco, and I was applying to business schools. And I had gotten waitlisted at one of them, and they said, Wes, we love your career experience, all the amazing projects you've led, but one thing does worry us, which is your quantitative grades in school were kind of terrible, including calculus 1. So here was this calculus class coming back years later to haunt me again, and they gave me a choice. They said, you can either submit your application as is, or it would increase your chances greatly of being accepted here if if you wanted to retake calculus and show us, prove to us that you actually can do math. And so it was this like white whale like situation. And so I decided to do it. And this time the class was totally different. I took it at a UC Berkeley extension course, and there were only, I want to say, 6 or 7 students in the entire class. The professor, Professor Jurgen, was amazing. He made everyone sit in one row, the front row of the class. So all 7 of us sitting in the front row, and every couple of minutes he would have us um, trade off, going down the line one to the other, answering a different question that he had to make sure that everyone was with the rest of the group the entire time. No one was getting left behind. And I ended that class getting an A. And I was shocked. This was not just about getting an A in this class. This was about changing my own mindset and view of myself and story about myself as someone who is bad at math. This was kind of this narrative that I've had pretty much my entire life. And here was this transformative learning experience where I completely challenged that assumption because of the learning format, the small groups, the interactivity, a professor who really cared. Um, and it really inspired me to think differently about education. That, there must be so many people out there who think I'm bad at writing, I'm bad at math, I'm just not good at numbers, or I could never do science, or I'm not good at whatever, right? And it could be that, it's not that you're bad at that. It's that the learning environment that where you learn that wasn't conducive to the way that you learn. And so that really inspires me to build something with Maven that can introduce a new format, this format that my co founder and I named Cohort Based Courses, which is a concept that Seth Godin and I kicked off when we launched the altMBA. This idea that, instead of learning being one directional, sage on stage, the expert knows everything, talks at everyone, who just sits obediently and listens, what if we disrupted that model and said, that's the old way? The new way is bi-directional learning, where yes, the student learns from the instructor, but the instructor also learns from the student, and students learn from each other. So it's learning in a much more dynamic way, where students are participatory. It's an active experience. You are mentally engaged the entire time. You are responsible and accountable as a student to bring your A game. And the community aspect, the aspect of really digging in and learning alongside other people who are excited to learn with you, from an instructor who really cares and wants to be there, and who has done it before, who has walked the path that you want to walk. I'm very, very excited by that and inspired by that. And that's what we're trying to build.
Wow. Thank you. I don't think that I've heard that story in other podcasts that you have told. So
Well, I was
thank you. I
pretty
really
embarrassed about revealing, my shit grades for a while. So
okay, I think enough time has passed that now that we can do
right,
it.
right.
That is interesting. Now, this is obviously that moment in time that took you to this other path that is Maven. What happened in between? Because I'm curious, and I know that this question may take even hours to answer. So it's not that's not my intention. But my intention is to understand now that I've seen the work that you've done in altMBA, which I am an alumni from that. Now I can see a lot of the influence that you had on altMBA and other ones like Tiago Fortes, building a second brain, Maven, the cohorts, obviously, and everything that is happening. What are the key elements that you would say that you had to hone? What are the skills that other people may not consider important enough to hone, but that you realize that you needed to hone, that got you to this point, unbeknownst to you, probably?
Yeah, I love this question. I think that, a lot of times when people think of the term generalist, there's kind of a neutral, if not negative, connotation where it's kind of like, oh, a generalist must be someone who just isn't particularly good at anything. You know, I actually think that a generalist is someone who is good at a bunch of different things. A very good generalist is good at a bunch of different things. And so I think throughout my career, I focused on marketing, on customer acquisition, on brand building, category creation. But a lot of that work is informed by um, knowing at least the basics, the fundamentals of a bunch of different areas, and getting interested in adjacent areas besides marketing. So sales is huge, uh, project management, business analysis, becoming detail oriented enough to be able to catch different things before you publish, and it might influence the entire brand. Writing, right? So these are all skills that I've worked on throughout the years. I would say that there were a couple formative experiences for me. The first was right out of school. I worked at Gap Corporate, and I did a rotational training program that was a year long, and then eventually became a business analyst. And mind you, this is right after college, right after all of my bad grades in anything quantitative. Um, and so I was shocked that this global corporation was hiring me to be a business analyst in a role that was 100% numbers driven, right? Like
Right.
I was kind of like, okay, there must be a mistake here. And I knew that this was going to be very hard for me, right? Because usually the common wisdom is choose an area that you are good at, that you are excited about, and work, right? Develop your career in that area, right? So this is my first job out of school, and I was going into an area that was very difficult for me, that did not come naturally around numbers, right? Um, I decided to still do it because I thought that it was an incredible opportunity to learn how to how to develop business fundamentals around understanding numbers, reading numbers, being less afraid of data, right? And it was an amazing training opportunity where, I remember um, one of my first weeks there just looking at all these different spreadsheets and being like, I literally do not understand anything. Like, this is like a foreign language. These numbers mean nothing to me, right? And by the end of my experience there, I was excited to grab a spreadsheet and try to piece together and figure out, what does the story say in these numbers? What is the customer telling us about their buying behavior, about trends from this season, or the past year or the past 3 years? What are trends that we can see? What's percent contribution, and variance that we can look at? um, and so I think one of my big lessons is, if there is something that you are very afraid of, that you're very bad at, you could spend your entire life trying to avoid that, or you can get good enough at it that it stops being a blocker for you. You don't need to make that your main thing, because you're never going to be as good at it or better at it than someone where it comes naturally for them, right? But it is useful to have it not be something that prevents you from advancing in your career. So I feel like really early on, developing the ability to think analytically was super important. And this was over 15 years ago now. And I still think about all of the lessons that I learned from being a business analyst at Gap. The way that, even though I don't work a ton with numbers today, the way it sharpened my analytical ability is something that's very applicable everywhere. So that was one. I think the other big area that I found to be um, much more important than people realize is detail orientation. Being detailed, being able to manage projects and manage moving parts. So I used to be not very detail oriented either. Like, I remember, forgetting to turn in homework assignments, forgetting that the project was due, forgetting dates for this and that. So I've built a lot of systems for myself to remember different things, and I live by my calendar. I block things off. I have reminders in there. Um, if I
Do you
don't
have
put it in my
any
calendar, I won't
system?
remember to do it.
Do you
What
have
was
any
that?
system that you do you have any system that you remember that you can say this is something that changed in the way that
I
I
do
set
have
up?
an assistant that I started working with a couple months ago, but these are systems that I built long before that. So
Correct.
even without an assistant, um, those systems helped a ton.
Mhm.
So, and I think that's important. I think you want to be self sufficient enough to
Mhm.
not need to rely on someone else to kind of
Right.
get your act together. So for me, learning to catch minor errors, learning to
Mm.
think about holistically, making sure that whatever I'm executing is um, is the strongest version of what I can present. I think that's super important. And I see a lot of people who kind of scoff at the idea of being detailed, because they think like, oh, like oh, like that shouldn't be that important, right? Like I have, these big ideas, I want to work on strategy, I want to do all these big things. But if you can't handle the details well enough, then you can't be trusted to handle anything more complex than just the basic things. So I think that that's another area um, where you don't have to be the most detail oriented person ever,
Mm,
but like you also don't want it to be something where you're seen as someone who does sloppy execution, or that you always
mhm,
forget this, or you always need someone to check your work before it can be released to customers, right? Like you don't want to be
mm.
that person. Um, so yeah, so I feel like there were these couple different areas that for me used to be blockers for my ability to do the work that I wanted to do. That once I handled those and addressed them, really helped my career be able to move forward at a velocity that I was excited about.
That is so interesting because, like you said, the majority of business gurus, let's say even Peter Drucker or something like that, they say focus on your strengths, forget about your weaknesses. In this case, what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, it is yes, focus on your strengths and your weaknesses. You just need to get them at a level that are good enough.
Exactly. Yes. I am all for focusing on strengths. So, after a certain point of making sure your weaknesses are no longer actively stopping you from accomplishing your goals, then you definitely want to go all in on your strengths. But yeah, I just think it's a shame if, you have these big dreams and you have big plans, big ambitions, but there are these blockers, that will kind of just haunt you unless you figure them out.
Nice. Let me tie this, Wes, into the leadership aspect because you are also a reference in leadership, and based on the skills that you are mentioning, for example, this one that you mentioned, like thinking analytically, which sounds like what you call it, thinking, rigorous thinking, correct? That is
Exactly.
one of the frameworks that you have. And the other one that I found interesting is the learning to catch your own errors. How do you exercise those ones, or how did you get into the habit of using them? Because many people will usually in the tradition, in the traditional education, they will read about it and they think that they already got the knowledge, air quote knowledge. And from that point on, yes, I theoretically got it, but in essence, they don't. How do you make sure that you're doing the reps?
Yeah, reading about something versus actually trying it. It's kind of like reading about swimming versus actually getting in the water and seeing if you can swim. It's like those are two very, very different things. And so, yeah, I think reading about a topic is definitely a start. I think that is great. Like you want to expose yourself to different ideas, to start reading about different people's experiences, but nothing replaces actually trying something yourself. So I think for me, with learning to become more detailed, um, it was a experience early in my career. Actually, this was during college. I did an internship um, and at a PR firm, and I remember at the time thinking that I was pretty detailed. It's kind of funny because I feel like when you're bad at something, you're like, oh, I'm probably pretty good at it, or at least average, right? So I remember at the time thinking like, oh, this is not something I need to work on. And I remember one of the higher ups saying that they wanted me to clean up a spreadsheet, make it clean, make it more organized. And so they sent me this Excel sheet, and I did some stuff on it, sent it back, and the guy was just like, "This is terrible. Like this is so bad." And he pointed out 20 things that I had missed, um, and the font sizes, the fonts were different, the text sizes were different. There were like random grid lines in some parts, but not others. And just like he like pointed out all these different things, and I remember just being amazed. Like first, I think I was terribly embarrassed, and then the next thing I was like pretty excited that like wow, like I did not see any of this until he pointed it out. And once I saw it, it was like I couldn't unsee it, you know? And and it actually was really exciting because I think that as professionals, learning to see in new ways is one of the most exciting things, right? It's like we go through life like seeing at a certain level, and then someone points something out or shares feedback with us, or points out something that we didn't notice before, and all of a sudden it's like your world has now opened up a new layer. It's like you were seeing in black and white, and now you can see in color, and all that color was there the entire time, but you just couldn't see it. you know so for me, someone giving me really direct feedback about the areas that I'd missed, the gaps that I didn't even see, um, was very inspiring for me and prompted me to look for these other areas where, hey, like, I thought I was doing fine before, but what are all these different things that I don't even see, and sometimes it's hard to even know what excellent looks like if what you're kind of used to, or you don't have points of comparison, right? So you're kind of like, oh, like, yeah, my strategy doc looks pretty good, or my write up looks pretty good, um and so you don't have another point of comparison, which is why every time that I notice something that is executed very well, I make a note of it. I add it to my swipe file, I share it with my team, I analyze what did they do well. This isn't even just things that are customer facing, or building public. This is internal stuff too. Like the other day, I saw one of my team members had a Notion doc, created a Notion doc that was super well organized. There was great information hierarchy. And usually when you think of organized, you think like, oh, is an executive assistant organized? Okay, like that's such a lowly trait or whatever. But there's information hierarchy and a lot of rigorous thinking that goes into making something easy for your audience to consume, right? So this Notion doc, the way that it was organized, the different toggles, the way that the argument was laid out, it had the right amount of detail on the right things. It wasn't just like all over the place, this hard to consume, and it really took the cognitive load off of me, the reader. And I remember thinking like, wow, like this is sharp. Like this helps me understand what they are thinking, why they are presenting this, why we should do this, the risks involved and what we're going to do about it. Like all of it just was so cohesive. And so, anytime that you notice that someone has done something that lands really well with you, don't just be like, okay, that was great, moving on to the next thing. Really stop for a moment and dissect and try to understand what made it so good, so that when you do something like that, when you create your next Notion doc, when you do a write up, you can incorporate elements of that and continually make your own work stronger.
Yeah, it's so what I'm hearing is once you got this feedback on your sloppy work on your initial job, you did not take it as a critique to yourself, but instead obviously the work that you have done, and that is one way to accelerate feedback. The other way is the one that you're pointing out, which is when something is properly done, how can we learn from it and replicate it? Because that is the end goal of all of this, right? Not just once in a lifetime that it happens, and not being able
Exactly.
to
Yes.
replicate.
Being able to replicate something is kind of quite high level of a goal. Not replicate as in copy directly, but replicate the impact that it had. So your Notion doc might look different than this other one that your colleague wrote that was great, but you want it
Correct.
to land as strongly. You want it to land in the same way where the person receives it and is like, wow, like that's well structured. This is organized. I feel like you know what you're talking about. You're a competent
Mm.
individual. So yeah, thinking about how do I incorporate this into my own work? How do I practice and try to execute in the same way? You will probably realize that it's harder than it looks. Because anytime
Mm.
that you try to put theory into practice, there are usually hiccups along the way. That's what real learning is. So that's totally normal. But don't get frustrated. Keep trying. Keep iterating until you uh,
Mm.
come to something that you are happy with, that reaches the result that you want to reach.
Wes, what is the name of that framework that you have that starts the process of iteration? You have a framework that is I'm trying to recall right now, the first shitty draft.
Oh, shitty first
Is that
drafts. Yes,
one?
SFDs.
First
Yes,
shitty
that's a
draft.
concept from Anne Lamott from Bird by Bird. She's an author who has this amazing book about writing and the craft of writing. And she came up with the term shitty first drafts, and we use that throughout Maven Course Accelerator.
So this is the beginning of the iterative process, and probably that Notion doc that you found did not start like that. Maybe it did not even start like that, but it went through several iterations. So now, how did this tie into the CBCs, into the first creation of a CBC? Because many people, they think that they don't know enough to teach someone, or even though they do not agree with the way that traditional education works, they're still not fully faithful. They don't believe in themselves, thinking that, oh, I don't know where to start and things should change, and I know that the knowledge that I have may help someone, but it's just stops at a hopeful dream instead of taking action. How do you guys help in Maven to this kind of people?
Yeah, I love this question. One thing that I find kind of ironic and kind of funny is that some of the best instructors that I've seen started out thinking that maybe they didn't have anything to teach people, which is just shocking to me because I think that there are a bunch of people who are not worried about this at all, who are not self conscious about this at all. That are going out and teaching and sharing what they know, and and many of them are not as qualified as people who are more thoughtful about whether they have enough knowledge. So I would say that if you are debating if you have enough knowledge, that is already a good sign that you are being mindful about wanting to deliver a great experience for your students, about not wanting to, overpromise, right? So, so that's step one. I think the second thing after that is to realize that your level of expertise, it's not an absolute line in the sand where it's like, oh, if you have X number of years you can teach, if you have less than this number of years of experience you can't teach, right? It's not that at all. It really is relative to your student's experience. So if you are a couple steps ahead of your student, you have something to teach them, right? If you are somewhere here and claiming to teach something that you aren't great at, or to teach a student, to target student that actually knows more than you, then don't do that, right? But most people can think of themselves a couple years ago and the challenges that you were facing a couple years ago that you have since figured out, right? So wherever you are, there are people who are a couple steps behind you who could benefit from your learning. So I really think that this shift from thinking about it as in terms of like absolute, amount of experience before, you cross some threshold where you can teach, you know, not thinking about it that way, but more thinking about it in terms of relative terms with where you are versus your student.
Got it. And so this one takes me into go back. Let's go back to the CBC model. Um, Nowadays you have plenty of instructors in so many different areas, right? So what is the mission of actually Maven? How did, let's take a little bit of the story of Maven and how you guys are impacting traditional education, please.
Yeah, I think traditional higher education is pretty cost prohibitive, pretty expensive for many people. And we don't plan on replacing higher education anytime soon. I think there's deep roots with higher education, but we do want to present an alternative for people who are looking for one, especially for adult learners. If you think about formal learning, you do kindergarten through 12th grade, and then you do 4 years of college. Some people do a master's degree, right? Fewer people do a PhD, but for most people, formal learning stops after college. And so after the age of 21, 22, until you're, I don't know, 50 or 60, where are you learning in a formal capacity? Like, there is no place really. We are still learning on the job from coworkers, from articles that we read, communities that we're in, news sources, publications. We're learning informally though, and a lot of that is kind of piecing together the things that you need to know in kind of a little bit of a disjointed way. And so what we're really excited about is offering experts who have deep operational experience in modern relevant fields, and connecting them with students who are in those roles trying to learn. So if you are the sole marketer at a startup, right? You're learning a lot on your own, and wouldn't it be great to learn from someone who was an early marketer at a fast growing company who can share what are the systems that they put in place, what are the tools that they used, what are the principles that they really relied on, what are the frameworks that they found most helpful, and then to do that with a cohort of 100 other sole marketers at their own companies. Like, all of a sudden your journey becomes a lot less lonely You're not just the only one on an island figuring out yourself. You now have 99 friends who you can learn from and share ideas with, right? And so just being surrounded by the energy that I think was so inspiring for all of us when we went to college, right? It wasn't just about the classroom, it was about the energy of being around other people with dreams and other people with ambitions and goals and projects that they were working on, really bringing that energy to continuing education and to adult learners who want to continue sharpening their skills, whether that is in product management, whether that's in people management, leadership, or in accounting and finance, or customer success, whatever that might be. There are other people who are in your shoes, who are in your situation, who want to learn the same thing that you can be in community with, and there are experts who were in your shoes years ago who can teach you what they learned, and hopefully prevent some of the trials and tribulations, the scrapes on the knees from doing everything through trial and error.
One of the things that personally I love from CBC's cohort based courses is that we have the chance to have direct contact, like you said, with experts. Sometimes I think because of the way that traditional education worked, is that you see this professor, this teacher, this mentor so far ahead away from you, and you cannot reach out to this person, and the only way is probably through books, or if you would be super lucky and you access a university where they teach something like that. But with CBCs, what I'm seeing is that the content, the connection, I should say, it is so direct. Now, in your case, let me ask you this: how did you start getting yourself in front of top companies, top industries? What challenges had to go through so that you can learn these things that now other people are like me, we're accessing in easier ways? How did you put yourself in front of those big players?
Yeah, I think some people look at some of the brands and people that I've worked with and assume that you know things have always been successful for me. But I actually have gotten rejected many times, more times than I can count. I've applied to so many jobs I got rejected from, uh, to clients that didn't want to work with me. So I think that is it's I want to share that because you can look at other people who have an interesting career. They worked with interesting brands, interesting people, interesting roles, and it's really to think like, oh, it's easy to think I could never do that. Like there was something special about that person, um, and and a lot of it is just showing up over and over again and figuring out how you can add value and developing yourself to become someone who can add value. So a common question that I get is, how did you start working with Seth Godin? The Seth Godin, right? Like, how did this happen? There are so few people in the world who have worked directly with him, much less for 3 years in a really close capacity. And it was very serendipitous. So at the time, I was at an ad tech startup backed by Sequoia Capital in San Francisco and was looking to move to New York. And I happened to see a blog post that Seth had, which said, "Hey, I'm looking for a special projects lead for a 6-month project to help me figure out what I should do next." At the time, he had just sold his last company, which he had worked on for 8 years, and was kind of at a crossroads, figuring out what is the next big thing that I should invest in. And I saw that very coincidentally, and I decided to apply. So, you know, I thought there must be thousands of other people applying. I don't want to get my hopes up. So, there was a written application, there was a video that you had to film. In the video, the prompt was something like, tell us what you want to contribute, what you want to learn, what you want to build, something like that. And I did my video in one take. Normally if I had thought I had a chance, I probably would have done it like, I don't know, 12 times or something. But I did it in one take thinking, I don't want to get my hopes up. I'm probably not going to get this anyway. And a couple days later, I see Seth Godin in my inbox. And he's like, "Hey, I saw your video, loved what you talked about. I think, this could be an interesting fit. Let's hop on a call for an interview." We did, multiple rounds of interviews. And, I was jumping up and down in my living room, but of course wrote a very calm reply, you know, saying like, "Yes, like great, like, figuring out the schedule." So So I think my first lesson, um, and from this is always apply, always put yourself out there. Like I think a lot of us take ourselves out of the running, take ourselves out of the race before the race even started because we think, oh, we're not qualified enough. There's so many other people who are applying. I'm never going to get it. And then you just never end up showing up. So I think continuing to show up, put your hat in the ring is super important. I think the other thing is, at that time, I think I had 8 or so years of experience already, working at a bunch of interesting brands, on developing my skills in the function of marketing, customer acquisition, brand management. And so I had a lot of experience to build off of and to offer. And in addition to that, I was also active in various side projects for a long time. So at the time, I was running an event series, storytelling event series, like a series of salon talks. Um, and so I was doing that. In high school, I founded a nonprofit organization that donated backpacks and school supplies to underprivileged kids. So I'd always had various projects and a very entrepreneurial spirit. And also, I'd written my blog since 2010. So it's 2022 now. So it's been 12 years since I've started writing. And there were years when I wrote more, years when I wrote less. The year before I started Maven, I think I had um, 43 articles, so almost on a weekly basis. And then I started Maven, and I think that year, 2020, was it 2020? Yeah, 2020, I had like 5 articles because, I was a full-time startup founder at that time. But there were years when I wrote more, years when I wrote less, but I was always actively thinking about my craft, about marketing, about sales, about customer acquisition, about growth. And so I was able to bring a lot to the table and say, hey, I have all these skills that I want to bring to help you, whether that's a client, whether that's an organization, whether that's Seth Godin or whatever. Um, so I think that's something else that I would really encourage people to do is think about building your skill set so that you have value to offer, to the kinds of people that you want to work with. And then with after altMBA, I worked with clients like Professor Scott Galloway, the co-founders of Morning Brew, um, Susie Batiz, who founded and was CEO of Poopery, with William Ury, who wrote several seminal negotiation books that are kind of staples at all business schools. So yeah, I worked with Outlier, who was co-founded by that was co-founded by the co-founder of Masterclass. So I worked with a bunch of really interesting companies, and all of those clients came in through word of mouth. So those were all literally from people who had seen my work before, had seen my proof of work, on the internet, and from other companies that I'd worked on and built, and been like, hey, like we think you can help us, you know, and so instead of I think a lot of people focus too much on um, trying to market themselves or grow their audience, or like kind of focus on some things that are important, but maybe a little downstream, whereas the upstream areas that you should focus on is being able to deliver. That's super super important. You don't want to focus on growing your audience at the expense of being really good at your craft. You want to be really good at your craft and also have an audience, because otherwise you're going to get these referrals, you're going to get clients, you're going to get people wanting to work with you, and then once they work with you, they're going to be like, oh, actually, like this was not that rigorous, right? Or like you weren't, it was too surface level, or you weren't really able to help us, like so so you want to really make sure that you have a strong foundation of value that you can provide, that you can come in and really drive results for whoever it is that you're going to work with. Because, word of mouth is real, and clients talk to each other, and customers talk to each other. So you want to make sure that you are delivering real value. And then, of course, growing your audience and making sure people know who you are and how to find you. Of course, that's important too, but not at the expense of being able to actually deliver value.
Correct. Uh-huh. But now that I think about it, it's like becoming an MBA or a soccer star and not practicing, just getting the photos and the ads, but
Exactly.
forgetting about going to trade.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You actually have to be good at basketball. Like that's like, I feel like many people like don't think about that piece, and they jump ahead to like, oh, well, I want people to know how to find me or to, to listen to me and stuff. But yeah, like you actually have to be good at your craft.
Uh-huh. Wow, got it. Yeah, no, I got it in my mind now. That I'm not gonna forget with that metaphor. Let me ask you now with some questions, finalizing the interview, and most of them are rapid fire questions, which are now on you, how you perform as a top performer. What's the daily habits that you have, or stories, or things that make you function at an optimal level. So let me first ask, what are your daily habits that you do it every day that get you on top of everything?
Yeah, so I would say that in terms of daily habits, let's see. I block off my day so that the mornings I don't have meetings. It's deep work time in the mornings. And then 12 to 6 p.m. are meetings. And then after 6, it's deep work time again. So I think
Mm,
blocking off time for your brain to be creative and not be distracted every few minutes by a Slack message or by needing to task switch into another meeting, I think that kind of sets you up for success. Um, the other part of you know being as strong of a performer as you can, though, I don't think it has as much to do with more tactical um, productivity or scheduling type things. I think it's more um, really questioning whether what you are working on is what you should be working on, and
mm,
thinking about the ROI of what you're working on, and thinking about things like scope. I think too often people bite off a huge chunk of something and make something bigger than it needs to be. Whereas if it were a smaller thing, you could still get 90% of the upside from doing that thing. So I'd put this broadly under the bucket of thinking rigorously, thinking about the upside, the downside, trade offs, thinking about, does this really make sense? I think sometimes uh, we do something and then we repeat it thinking that, oh, this probably still makes sense, but in the meantime the your situation has changed, right? And what you were doing before
mm,
doesn't actually apply anymore and isn't actually the right thing anymore. So thinking rigorously, challenging yourself to think rigorously, I would say is one of the best things that you can do.
mhm. Can you briefly explain to the audience what are ways that you train yourself to think rigorously on a frequent basis, please?
Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting one. Well, I have an article on rigorous thinking where I mention 15 to 20 questions that you can ask yourself. And then the
Perfect.
other thing is the benefit of being surrounded by other rigorous people. That's, it's one thing to ask yourself and try to catch things yourself, but sometimes it's like my friend Sarah Peck says, it's trying to read the label of a jar from inside the jar.
Hmm.
And which is hard, right? Like it's hard sometimes to catch things that you might be doing that just feel more normal for you. So being surrounded by other people who are rigorous, who can call you out is really great, right? And then you
Mm,
can call each other out and poke holes in each other's arguments and line of thinking, and then be able to fill those holes and make something better before you actually start executing on it. So,
mm,
being surrounded by other rigorous people, giving them permission and encouraging them to poke holes in your thinking and to call out if they think differently. To encourage them to do that. You don't want to be someone where someone is afraid to disagree with you or to point out a
mm,
different line of thinking because they're afraid you're going to get upset or defensive. And especially as a leader, you need to constantly remind people of this because people are naturally a little bit scared of you given the power dynamic
mm,
already. So I always like reminding my team, like, what do you think? And like, hey, if you think differently, like definitely speak up, right? Like this is how I'm thinking about it now,
mm,
but I might be missing something, right? Or like, do you think differently on this? Like, what do you think? Like really encouraging that and soliciting that feedback and encouraging them to help you think more rigorously and poke holes in the
mm.
way that you're currently thinking.
Wow, and that requires courage and vulnerability, like you said, which creates connection, creates connection between the team members. And just to add on top of this, this is the idea that is coming to my mind is thinking about this ROI of what I am doing and sharing this with another person to see if they can poke holes on this one. Also enables what I would say is second and third order consequences of what I am
Exactly.
doing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think one more thing is sometimes I think all of us can get too caught up in um, the kind of the mechanics of executing something, of trying to reach some numerical goal, or executing a certain plan. um, and it's helpful to step back and think about whether this plan is still the plan that we should execute. Is this really something you feel conviction
Mm,
about? I think a lot about conviction. I never want to do something where I'm like not really sure if this is the right thing, but I'm just kind of doing it. Like you, as a leader, especially, you want to reach conviction. You want to truly, deeply believe that what we are doing here is the best way to get to our goal, is the best way to get to our outcome, is the smartest way to get to our outcome, you know? And if, and sometimes I think it's easy for teams to kind of think like, okay, so this is our goal. Here's a plan that kind of logically makes sense. And we're just going to start doing it. Whereas like, like you really want to step back and be like, do I really believe that this is the best way? Right? Like if I were fully accountable, which we should all think of ourselves as fully accountable, is this the path that I would choose? And if it's not, you really want to have a conversation with your team and and reflect yourself. Why aren't we doing the thing that you think is the easiest, fastest, best way to get to your goal? Like, why are you doing this other thing? So I think challenging and reflecting to make sure that you have conviction about your plan and that you are not just going through the motions is a good reminder to constantly check in on.
nice, thank you. Let me ask another question that now goes from the habits. Now let's go to a story or a moment of what people would consider failure that you thought probably at some point it was a failure, but it ended up becoming a growth catalyst. Maybe not at that moment, you did not see it, but over time you saw that, oh, thankfully that happened. Do you have any episode like that?
Yeah, I feel like it's not I don't have a single kind of transformative moment for this, but I feel like this happens every week or every other week. There's something where, I did a thing, I thought it would land, it didn't land, with the audience, whether the audience is, my co-founders, uh, on Twitter, my direct reports, like, something didn't work the way that I wanted it to. And at the time it's always a little bit disappointing. Um, and maybe even frustrating, but usually afterwards I'm like, okay, cool. Like I'm glad that happened because I learned from it and I was able to see I was able to challenge and sharpen my mental model around something, right? So like maybe, one quick example from recently, explaining an idea to your team, right? And like not and let's say they don't fully get it or there's a lot of confusion. You can take that as, oh, this really failed. Or you can think about it as, okay, like the way that I explained it didn't resonate with this group. And they had a bunch of questions around these two areas. So like, what is the pattern here? How can I better address this in advance in the future? How can I empathize with the way that my audience receive this information so that I can proactively address those points and prevent some of that misunderstanding? So I feel like stuff like that just it happens all the time. So I'm constantly kind of refining and making a mental note of like, oh, that was interesting. I thought X was going to happen, but actually Y happened. And I think actually moments like that happen every day, every week for us.
Yeah.
So you can either take those as, um, you can either reflect on them or kind of just like not think about it. And I think it's better to
Mhm.
reflect because you want to constantly hone your own predictive ability to get the
Hmm.
result that you want. And so, yeah, there's tons of opportunities I think on a weekly basis to hone that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's something what I would call the micro failures. Instead of having massive failures, learning
I
from
like
those
that.
micro ones and then iterating. Also learning from micro successes as well, like you said, like
Exactly.
you mentioned in
Yes.
the beginning.
Yes. Huge.
Nice. Thanks. I want to still be respectful of your time. Are we good with 7 more minutes?
Yes. Yeah. Let's do it.
Perfect. Cool. What is the definition of a successful day for you?
Ooh, I would say a successful day is when I um, feel like I've had very mentally engaging conversations with my team to figure something out. And
Mm,
it might be a challenge that we are working on. With startups, there are many challenges that we're currently tackling. And so having a rigorous conversation where we uncover a certain insight or get conviction around what we want to do, um, and really get excited about what we're doing. Um, I think that most teams benefit from more thoughtful conversations around why are we doing what we're doing, how are we doing it, what's the strategy, how do we learn from the thing that we just executed. So I feel very very fortunate that the team that I work with are are fellow nerds, I would say, in this way that we get excited um, to talk about work and to unpack something and to learn from a recent campaign that we did and really analyze it. So I think that mental stimulation, that's probably the one term that I would say makes a successful day, is when I feel like there was a lot of intellectual and mental stimulation.
thank you. And I know, and just correct me if I'm wrong, one of your habits also to have downtime is taking care of plants like the ones that you have back there, right?
Yes, all these fellows. Yes.
Yeah. Nice. Wes, what is something that you have unlearned in recent years that improved the quality of your life?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one. Um, I used to I used to think that working hard meant that I needed to burn myself out. That my definition
Mm,
of knowing when I was working hard enough was when I was about to break, like pushing myself to the very extreme, and using brute force to more time, more effort, always just like throwing more at something, um, and and in recent years, I've learned that that is not a sustainable way to run a marathon, basically. And so, yeah, I think that that is something that I've had to unlearn. That, and I think it's something that I'm still unlearning. It's a pattern that's
mm,
kind of it's run deep, and sometimes I feel guilty. Like if I'm not like exhausted, I feel a little bit guilty that I'm not like pushing myself hard enough, quote unquote. And so that's something that I've unlearned a lot, but I'm still, there's still remnants of it that I need to be mindful of.
right.
Um, and yeah, embracing a more sustainable approach, or a more sustainable definition to what hard work is, right? And
Mm,
what hard work really looks like.
right. And also, like you said, the ROI, understanding what is the ROI of the work that we're doing right now, and also what's going to be the ROI to ourselves as a person, not only for the work that we're putting, but
Yes.
what is the cost that
Yeah.
we are
Great
paying
point.
for this. Nice. I really appreciate it. It is it's I know that we can speak up for hours and I have so many notes. So hopefully we're gonna have a second version of this in the future when you guys have some time. But I wanted to ask you, where can people find you on the net?
Yes, you can find Maven on Twitter at MavenHQ and Maven.com. And then you can find me at Wes_KO and WesKO.com.
Thank you. And I would encourage everyone to please go and check every single one of her articles. They're amazing. Now, Wes, what is, well, in this case, let me ask, this is usually the last question that we ask our guests, and each is, if you could leave the audience with a question to expand their minds, what would that question be?
Hmm. I would ask, what makes your eyes light up? And how can you do
Mm,
more of that in your daily work?
nice. Right. And eyes light up. Let's define this little part for the rest of the
Yes.
people. I know that there's a blog post there.
Yes. So uh, I call I call this idea eyes lighting up, and it's this
Mhm.
idea that um, when we are viscerally, naturally excited by something, our eyes light up.
Mm.
And you can apply this concept when talking to customers, but you can also apply it to yourself. So when it's talking to customers, you might be telling your company's story or your own story, and most people will listen pretty politely. Um, but you can kind of tell if they're bored in certain parts of the story. And there'll be other parts of the story when their eyes light up. When you said something that triggers a reaction and you can tell that they are now hanging on to your every word. They are now listening a bit more carefully than they were before. So so I call this concept eyes lighting up, that you want to look for when other people's eyes light up as clues of
Right.
how to talk about your product, how to talk about your brand, how to talk about your story, and to know which boring parts to trim out. So I also like applying this idea of eyes lighting up to ourselves. That what
Mm.
are the things in your work that make your eyes light up, that you are naturally gravitate towards, that you are naturally excited by, and how can you craft a career that allows you to do more and more of the things that you are naturally good at, that you can add a
Mm.
lot of value from, that you're excited by, that make your eyes light up.
Thank you for explaining. That is super helpful, Wes. Are there any other last messages that you would like to leave the audience of the podcast with?
Yeah, I think one is one that you are familiar with, the Maven Course Accelerator. So JJ was an alum in our Maven Course Accelerator. We just launched our latest cohort this week. So we have 200 some new experts who are currently building their courses. So if you are an expert who wants to share your knowledge and you want to build a course, the Maven Course Accelerator is a free program that allows you to do so. We teach you everything that you need to know end to end on how to create a course in the most efficient way possible. I personally teach the course. My team helps run it. And we'd love to meet a bunch more experts who should be sharing their knowledge more broadly.
Thank you, Wes. And definitely, I highly encourage everyone to take a look at what Wes is doing in the cohort based course on how to build cohort based courses. It's super
Oh, and
meta,
it's
but it's
completely
totally
free.
worth it.
So
And
it's a
it's completely
free
free.
free
Yeah,
course. Yeah.
perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, and you will be able to also connect with other experts.
Hmm.
Thank you very much, Wes. It's been a pleasure to have you here on the show, and hopefully we will meet in the future as well.
Thanks, JJ.
If you guys enjoyed this conversation with Wes Kao from Maven, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to receive notifications for upcoming interviews. That's all for today. Keep learning and mostly keep optimizing. See you soon.